What's going on, everybody? We are back here live here on the OT show, and we got a great guest coming here on the show right now. Best-selling author. I mean, and what more can I say? Mr. Brent King going to be joining us in about 1 minute because he's actually on right now. But let me give y'all a brief introduction about Mr. Brent King. Right now, he's the best-selling author, international best-selling author, medium personality. Have a book Bank Point 4.0 when a world's award, excuse me, was awarded the top book by foreign authors in Russia for that year. In 2020, Mr. King was inducted into the Flint Tech Hall of Fame by CB. In 2015, he was on the short list of Average Global Australia of the Year award. His books has been released over a dozen languages, Bank Exchange magazines. And when I tell you I am glad to have him on because the stuff that he have in the book right now, and I'm going to tell y'all, he is the godfather of Flinch. Startup founder, host of the number one station right now podcast going on right now, number one Flinch Tech show. And I have him on right now with me, going to have a discussion about his new book. And I cannot wait. He is actually on. I said he's here. He got a
I'm here.
NASA. I see you. Hey, thank you so much. I know we probably got the time different because I know supposed to have been 3:15, but we three. But hey, we here.
Hey, we're good. We're good. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on.
Oh man, thank you. Well, first, thank you for joining us on this beautiful day. I definitely appreciate you here on the show. I'm glad that you're on because there's a lot of things that I got to talk to you about. And what more can I say about the rise of techno socialism? And when I was reading some of the book, is what's going on today.
Mm.
It is definitely what's going on today. So before we get into the book, let's talk about you. Okay,
Sure.
can you tell our listeners and people who are watching where you from and how you got started?
Well,
And
I'm
give us a little
originally
background.
sure. I'm originally from Australia, as you can probably tell by
Ah,
my accent. No worries, mate. No, I was I moved to New York about 11 years ago. Prior to
hmm
that, I spent time living in Dubai and Hong Kong. So I've really, lived around the world. I've been very fortunate with that. I started as a technologist. I used to, program computers. I used to be a coder many years ago. But about a decade ago, a little bit more, I started writing books on how technology was going to change the world. And as you mentioned at the start, I've focused a lot on the banking and fintech space.
hmm
Um, but found myself more interested in robotics, artificial intelligence, these types of technologies, and have really been writing about that over the last few years. But generally people call me a futurist. I tend to be talking about things that are going to happen 10 or 20 or 30 years time. I've had a startup based out of New York.
hmm
I run a radio show myself in New York. Over the years, do a podcast now. So tend to do a few different things, but it all focuses on the future impact of technology.
Yeah, yeah, because I know it seems like did we just lose you a little bit? No, we didn't lose. Can you hear me?
I hope not. Yeah, I can hear you. No problem. I'm still
Yeah,
here.
okay. Wow. So when how do you feel when people call you like a person that's talk about the future so much? because I know a lot of times when you hear people who talk about the future and artificial technology and what's going on in the tech world, a lot of people call them conspiracy theories, right? And for me, I don't. I come from a tech background. Went to
Right.
school, got a degree in computer science. So, technology in the '90s. That's the reason why I went that route, because I was going to be an architect. But people was like, "Nah, buddy, you need to go ahead and computers, learn the coding and the programming and stuff like that." So right now, how do you feel when people be like, "Oh no, you talk about the future so much and certain
Yeah, I
people
think,
see it different."
like, some when you're in the future space and you're talking about this, most of the time that people who sort of create a job around futurism, or the future, it's because we want to get to the future. We see all the
Mm-hmm.
potential of technology and how it can improve the world and so forth, and so we're in a hurry to get to that future. But the transition can be messy, and so
Yeah.
when you look at history, because that's a very good way to inform ourselves on how we might be impacted by these technologies. What has happened in the past, how do humans respond to it? So
Yeah.
over the last 250 years, with like the combustion engine, and motor vehicles disrupting
Yeah.
horse and carts, or the
Mm-hmm.
telephone and its impact on society, the television, and even just the internet and social media, we've seen
Right.
significant impact. So there are historical analogies, but technology marches forward regardless of how we feel about it. Because
Mm-hmm.
the one thing humans will always do is try and improve our life and improve the way we live through the use of technologies. It started with very basic tools. It started
Mm-hmm.
with agriculture and being able to secure our food supply and things like that. But ultimately, humans are strongly incentivized to use technology to improve our quality of life.
Yeah.
But technology is disruptive, and it forces change upon us. So right now, for example, we could talk about Tesla and self-driving vehicles.
Yeah.
So I mean, our grandkids are going to find it very amusing that we used to drive cars. They were like,
Yes.
"Really? You used to drive cars?
Right.
That's
Right. Right.
crazy, man!
Yeah.
Wasn't that dangerous?"
Right.
And the
Right.
answer is
Right.
yes.
Yeah. You are
So
absolutely right about that. You are
yeah,
absolutely right about that. Because now with technology, we seen how it have grown. We seen how now technology now is actually taking over a lot of workforce, especially when you
yeah,
come to customer service and interaction. Now it's more in a digital form, um, especially now with the crypto now what's going on, the digital
absolutely.
money is starting to overtake. What kind of responsibilities do you think like companies should have for employees right now? Because this is
Yeah,
America is based off of capitalism. Let's just go ahead and just say America is based off of capitalism.
amen.
And if people don't believe that, then they really better go back in history and start looking. You know, what kind of responsibility do you think companies should have when it comes down to this? Because you look at Amazon, how Amazon is basically like 4 hours. Like you only work 4 hours, but they shipping. Oh, Amazon is everywhere. They shipping over 100,000 cases every 4 hours somewhere. You know, look at you.
It's
You
mind
shaking your
blowing,
head
right?
like it's coming. It's
No,
coming.
it is. Yeah, and so this is like, if we look at capitalism, at the heart of this is that, like, let's take the American dream. The American
Hmm.
dream was always, if you work hard,
Yep.
and you save money and you invest, then you'll be able to provide a better life for your children.
Yeah.
But today that's not so certain, because the shape of the economy is changing. The labor force is changing. So
Hmm.
labor requires a lot more technical skills, as an
Yeah.
example. But the biggest companies in the world today, they employ a lot less people because they
Yes.
have a lot of technology. And so it may, so these companies are hugely profitable. Look at Apple; they've got $300 billion of cash they're sitting on, and they're all $1 trillion companies.
Right.
But but if we took like I don't know, Johnson and Johnson, or General Electric, or one of those big companies of the 1950s and 60s, to get the same profit that Apple makes, they would have to have employed half a million people,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
Apple doesn't employ anywhere near that many people, because technology means they're a lot more efficient, a lot more productive. Now, if you play that out over the next 20 or 30 years with artificial intelligence and other technologies like that, there's going to be companies that have very small workforces but are extremely profitable. And
Yeah.
this means this accentuates the problem of inequality in the United States and around the world.
Hmm.
Because you can't, like, no matter how much you want to work in these highly automated societies, we are using artificial intelligence and technology to take humans out of the workforce. So
Yes.
this is the transition that we really have to be careful about. So do we tax corporations, for example, so that every robot that takes a human job, or every algorithm that takes a human job, has to provide another form of income or another job for those
Mm-hmm.
individuals,
Hmm.
retraining them, for example? That's
Yes.
one strategy.
Hmm.
But ultimately, AI is designed to take people out of the workforce. And
Yes.
so we have to think about reforming capitalism to cater for this possibility. And more interestingly, what are we going to do with our lives when we don't have to work to put food on the table? Well, we'll still work, but it
Work.
will
Right.
be right. It'll be things like fixing the climate, or it'll be pursuing art, or
Yeah.
science, or
Right.
technology. We'll have the freedom to do things that we're really passionate about, rather than a job that puts food on the table.
Yeah.
And I think that's the shift that's exciting. But in between that, between now
Yeah.
and that future state, in
Hmm.
a few decades, it's going to get pretty messy.
Yeah, 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 that's what I'm worried about. That exactly what I'm worried about, because when you look at all these big corporations and you start to see they are bringing more of technology, artificial AI, people call it, um, into industries, you like, well, what are our kids is going to be doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
I mean, look, I think the biggest employer globally, in, like, if you take our kids, so let's say in 30 years time, right?
mhm,
So around 2050.
okay,
So what will the world need from these people in the economy back then? Well, in that future, rather.
right,
So the biggest problem is going to be climate, and so there's going
yeah,
to be a lot of people working on climate. So let's take New York City or Miami. If you live there today, or in Toronto, for example, these are cities that will be inundated by sea level rise, with
yeah,
various levels of effect. This is
mhm,
not, this is not science fiction. We
right,
know sea
it's
rise
coming.
is increasing, and we
Yep,
have more flood events. We've had Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Ida in New York just in the last few
yep,
years, that flooded the subways and so forth. So, what are we going to do? We're going to build seawall defenses around New York? Are we going to, we have to fix infrastructure so it's climate resilient?
mhm,
We have to improve our electrical grids, with battery
yeah,
storage to support solar and things like
right,
that. So carbon extraction, pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere.
yeah,
There's a lot of new potential work coming for them, but at the same time, there's other areas that are going to be highly automated, like the way we grow our food, and the way the
yes,
way our supply chain works. Trucks are going to be going across country that are completely autonomous. As
yep,
we mentioned before. So the world really is going to change pretty quickly. 30 years is not a long time,
no, it's
um,
not.
but and I think that's the main message, is that our children and our grandchildren, they are going to experience such rapid change in the world
Yeah,
around them. So I
yeah,
would say sort of the number one skill set for
mhm,
survival in the future is adaptability, being able
yep.
to adapt yourself individually, and the sort of work you do and so forth.
Well, I can give you an example of something that I have learned, right? So, I thought that the climate, when people talk about global climate and stuff like that, I was one of those guys that was like, nah, it ain't happening, it ain't happening. Until I
Right.
went to Alaska. When I went to Alaska and seen um everything, I seen everything. I went to Alaska. It was in somewhere like in November, where it's supposed to have been like 30 degrees, 20
Yep.
degrees, and here it is. It's 60 degrees out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that right there changed my whole course of when you talk about global warming. I said, yo, global warming is real. It's real when I
It's
went to certain
it,
places.
Yeah, it's hard for people to imagine because the changes are happening quite slowly, right? And
Yeah.
we tend to be, we tend to be pretty binary. It either is or it isn't,
Yeah.
right? And we look at it and we
Right.
say, well, I can't see it now, and
Right.
so, until you see it in your face, with
Hmm.
that evidence, this sort of very progressive change in our weather systems is harder to accept. But the data's there,
Yeah.
a lot of people get caught up on if it's man-made or if it's just a change in climate. And the answer to that question is it really doesn't matter. It's going to change the way we live. It's
Yep.
certainly going to change the way we produce food, for example. It's going to produce
Hmm.
food scarcity. We're going to have cities flooded. Like if you think about if you live in the Maldives or Bangladesh, I mean, 80% of their land will be covered by water by 2050. That's the estimate.
Right.
You can't just sort of hope for a miracle there. You've got to start planning for moving
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of people that are going to be affected by this,
Yeah.
and that's where we're not very good at that as humans. We tend to
Hmm.
think much shorter term, like what's going to happen next quarter if you're in a company, or the next
Right.
year, or if you're in the politics in 2 years time or 4 years time, but
Yep.
that's about it, right?
Yes. Yes.
We don't think in terms of what's going to happen in 20 or 50 or 100 years. And that's a bit of a weakness in terms of humanity in respect to our ability to plan. And so when you come to thinking about something that's going to happen in 20 years, everyone says, well, we shouldn't be spending money on that now. Who's going to pay
Ri-
for that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But in 20 years' time, the fact that we haven't spent money on that today is going to be a really, really big problem,
And I'm
because
glad you said that.
it's going to be worse off, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so glad that you say that because right now we need to start focus on 10 years from now
Right.
because what I just read about up in California they had to slaughter a whole bunch of cattle, cows and stuff like that because it was a drought.
Yeah, they
So
can't
now the
have any
beef,
water.
yeah, yeah. So now the beef prices is actually going down right now because they had to slaughter all the because the
Yep.
drought, no water. That's a wake up call. That should be a very big wake up call for a lot of people. But you know what? Us, like you said, us as consumers and us as people, we look at that like, wow, I can get a steak now for a
Right.
dollar 20 a pound. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well,
no.
one example we use in the book is wine, right? And so we know
Hmm.
France, for example, is a leading wine producing country.
Yes.
But within just over a decade, like 2035, we
Hmm.
expect that the small increases in temperature that we're seeing will mean that the crops will start to fail in France, the wine crops. And so, like next decade, you have France is no longer a wine producing country, or they have a lot of problems producing wine. But because the temperature has increased slightly,
Hmm.
Britain will now become a wine producing country, right?
That's it.
And so that's sort of, you say, well, that's okay because we'll still have wine because Britain can make it, right? But then
Right.
what about all those farmers with the vineyards in
Yeah.
France?
France.
That they've suddenly lost their livelihood. So
Hmm.
it's a complex problem. But again, it requires adaptation, to these things. The meat thing is interesting. We're experimenting with lab grown proteins right now, so we're
Yeah.
going to be able to sort of grow meat cells in labs. We can do that at small scale now, but we should be able to improve the scale of that over time. So hopefully, in 10 or 20 years, when you eat a steak or a
Hmm.
burger, you're
Hmm.
eating meat that has been produced in a factory instead of having to kill cows, right?
Right. Right.
But But having said that, there's always probably going to be a market for natural meat versus lab-grown meat, right?
Listen, right now that's what's going on now. Organic or or regular now. And that's what's going on now. Like I tell people, for me, I have to eat like we get grapes and every grape have a seed. I have to eat a grape that have a seed. It's just
Yeah.
something with a grape that don't have a seed for
It's sort
me.
of weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is super weird. It's
Yeah.
super weird. But this is what we're going through now, right? And I want people to actually realize this, like change is coming. So we
Yeah.
have to adapt to the change and how things are being produced, how things is going to be moving. Like you said, with Britain and France, how Britain is going to be the number one seller in wine in the next 20 years or so, and France is not. So how people going to have to
Crazy.
adapt? Yeah, it is. It is very, very crazy. So so other than that, I mean, what else are we, able to do far as, you know, our responsibilities as human beings.
Sure. Well, I think the biggest shift here, OT, is that we have to think about human philosophy. Like, why are we here?
Right.
And so when we are arguing about, like, for example, there's a lot of discussion in the US around minimum wage right now.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
we're debating this: should we increase the minimum wage or shouldn't we? And it sort of like reduces humans down to this economic component of the economy, right? It's
Yes.
that you are a person that has a job that earns an income.
Right.
But if we step back from that, like, why are we here? What are we doing
Yeah.
on the planet? And
Yeah.
right now, we've sort of come into this philosophical crisis, which is the decisions we've made in respect to capitalism and economics are hurting us. It's produced climate change, arguably, but let's
Mm-hmm.
just take fossil fuels. In the 1970s and 1980s, we knew that pollution was killing people. About 8 to
Yes.
10 million people per year die because of pollution. This is just
Mm-hmm.
air quality. The
Right.
water quality is a whole different, set
Right.
of figures. So we've known for 50 years that the stuff we're putting in our air is killing people.
Mm-hmm.
And why haven't we stopped doing that? Well, because the fossil fuel companies and the car companies they're making a ton of money off this
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so the market's going, no, we love this stuff because it's making money. But money itself is sort of, an abstraction. It's something we created for
Yeah.
value exchange, but it's now money's more important than human lives. And so this is the philosophical question we have to deal with over the next 20 to 30 years, particularly as we see more disruption around technology and its role in the world, like AI and automation, and of course with climate, is we're going
Right.
to have to say, human lives, there's a point in time where the cost just no longer matters. That, for example, when we talk about coastal flooding, there's 570 cities around the world that are going to be affected by sea rise. So that, and so you add that to food scarcity because of the types of farming changes we talk about, and we're talking about somewhere between 300 million and 1 billion people that are going to be displaced because of climate, right? So if you've got 1 billion homeless people that can't eat, just saying, oh, that's their problem because they haven't worked hard enough, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or
Right.
let's close the borders and stop them from coming in. That's
Right.
no longer a reasonable solution,
No,
so we have
I
to
agree.
go beyond that. And so that's, I think that's where the philosophical shift comes in, is why are we here? What are we doing here on the planet? And the argument is that Aristotle made this back in, I don't know, the 5th century or whatever, was humanity's purpose should be to thrive. That
Yes.
humanity should aim to be the best we can possibly be. But the only way we can really do that is when we do that together, when we have, when we work collectively. Humans have always been at our optimal best in terms of innovation and advancement when we combine our skills. So like the
Yeah.
Human Genome Project,
Mm-hmm.
uncovering human DNA, the
Mm-hmm.
Apollo rocket program,
Yeah.
even just the creation of the coronavirus vaccine in record time, as a global
Right.
effort.
Right.
These are all
Yeah.
examples of when we work together, we can achieve incredible advances, and we're going to have to do that much
Yeah.
better over the next few decades, because if not, people are going to die. And that's not a
Yes.
reasonable trade-off. We can't, at some point in time, we have to say human lives and the quality of life on our planet and meeting the basic needs of humans, that should be the priority of the economy. Everyone should have a roof
Mhm.
over their head. They should have
Yes.
food in their belly. They should have access to education for their children, access to healthcare if they get sick. If the economy can't support these basic functions, then
Mhm.
the economy is a failure. It doesn't matter
Yes,
how
I
many
agree.
billionaires you have, right?
I
And
agree.
that's where the dysfunction we have in economics right now. The US has the highest inequality we've seen in US history. The top 1% of Americans own more than the bottom 90% of Americans, right? And
Wow.
that's just that's not balanced. It's not a reasonable system. It's not working for the benefit of all. It's skewed towards a very, very small group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right. So tell me. So tell me, knowing all this, and for our listeners and the people who are viewing, how can we get better? Like you said, we got to work together. But what kind of steps can we make as of right now?
Individually, yeah.
Yes, individually to help this cause.
Well, I think the first thing is educating yourself on what's happening right now, and where the breaks in the system are. I think if more people understood, for example, I'll give you one example. We talk about minimum wage, and we have an argument whether it should be $7 or $15 or
$15. Yep.
22 or whatever, right? But if you are working minimum wage for two 30-hour jobs a week, because we know that a lot of employers, they won't go above 30 hours because they have to pay you benefits. So a lot of people
Yep.
work two 30-hour minimum wage jobs. On that
Hmm.
basis, you can't afford to rent a one-bedroom home anywhere in the United States because the
True.
cost of rental is much higher. And so
Hmm.
that's really, being aware of that, for example, then that should change the tone of our conversation around minimum wage, that a living wage should be a basic right of humans. Then, we look at climate. Well, we can make
Hmm.
smarter decisions there, but probably, individually, if we all made changes, like changing our food habits or changing the amount of, miles we put on the car, we saw a marked effect during the pandemic where pollution suddenly disappeared from cities that were
Yes.
heavily polluted. So we know human activity can make these changes that change the society. But I think it really comes back to policy, putting pressure on our politicians to make smarter decisions. So, for example, not letting fossil fuel companies
Hmm.
dictate what is happening in terms of climate change. So
Yep.
if you look at the Scotland COP26 climate conference we've just had, with all the world leaders going,
Yeah.
including Justin Trudeau and Biden and so forth, the largest group that sent representatives to Scotland for the conference were fossil fuel companies. So that
Mm.
tells you they're still fighting
Yep.
against this perception, right? That
Yeah.
and so we need to put the pressure back on. We need to put the pressure back on the politicians and saying you can't be setting policy on energy production or on motor vehicle standards based
Hmm.
on what these companies are telling you to do
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
sponsoring you as politicians. We need to
Position.
call them
Yeah.
out on this stuff, right?
I agree. I agree. I definitely agree because that's what's going on right now. Like you said, this
Yeah.
company is built off of capitalism. So politicians and every big company, they funded these politicians' money. We all know that.
America has the best politicians money can buy.
But yes,
Absolutely.
You're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right about that. Well, I know one thing that I am doing far as changing is I changed my basically now I'm starting to grow more more of my vegetables.
Yeah.
Because because now I see what people that used to grow their vegetables are telling me, like your vegetables taste differently when you're growing them yourself.
Yeah.
And it it does. It does. It does.
I think,
So
some self-reliance there, if you
yeah,
can, I think that's important. We've seen supply chain problems in around the world at the moment after the pandemic, where
yeah,
people aren't getting access to certain goods.
yes,
And so I think having a bit of your own resilience there, access to clean water, access to food, if you can have your own solar panels so that you can have your
hmm,
own, you're not relying on the energy grid, because increasingly these old energy grids that haven't been invested in are going to start failing, like we saw with Texas during the winter last year.
yeah.
So I think having some resilience and making sure you have some, you can control some of your own outcomes, I think is important.
Well, I'll tell you a solar panel story real fast. So I
Please.
don't get a lot of sun where where I'm at. That, as they say, a rating, a
Right.
rating for my solar panel. So they was like, uh, I didn't know it was a rating to get solar panel. I never knew it was a rain. I'm like, okay,
Right.
if I see the sun couldn't hit, boom, here we go.
And
They
you
like,
should be
no,
able to generate electricity, right?
right, right. But it's a rating of where the sun hit and how much sun that you get per day. And I'm
Right.
like, well, if I'm trying to, help out with the world and the global economy and global climate, and you're telling me that I can't get it because it's not going to be more sourceful for me.
Right. Do
That's
you need more solar panels or what? The other element of this is, as we scale these up, these solar panel, we call them solar farms, right? When you have lots of
hmm,
solar panels together, as we
right.
scale these up, we can produce incredible amounts of energy. One suggestion is that we could put massive, we're talking hundreds of kilometers or hundreds of miles of solar farms on the Sahara, and that would be
Oh,
enough to generate enough electricity for Europe, for example. But
wow.
sun only works during the day. So what
Right.
happens at night? So you've got to also
Hmm,
do battery storage. And so
hmm.
improving battery technology so we can store more energy is also really critical advancement that we have to make. There are some examples we put in the book, like Tesla did a battery farm in the state of South Australia, in Australia, where I'm from,
Hmm,
and it was a 100 gigawatt battery farm, and so that's been able to store energy very effectively and has reduced the cost of energy to the grid. So,
wow.
but we need to scale this up. Like one
Right.
example in Australia, we need this in Texas, we need it in
Yep.
California, certainly right now. We need all of these. We need to sort of re-engineer our infrastructure around energy. So there needs to be big investment in that. But getting, here comes back to the political problem. Getting
Yep.
people to agree on investment in those arenas is pretty tough.
Yeah.
But that, over the next 20 to 30 years, we are just going to have to make changes in energy production and things like that that's more efficient for humanity. And ultimately, the reason we should do this is it's cleaner, but the cost benefits are significant.
Right.
Solar today is 1/10 of the price of coal in terms of generating 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So that
Hmm,
should be enough to
right.
argue for not producing any more coal plants, right? But that's
Yeah.
not what we're seeing at the moment. Coal has still some legs left, unfortunately.
Well, hey, Mr. Brent, man, I definitely appreciate you, man. I wish we had a little bit more time. You have to come back on the show where we can
I
get
appreciate it,
finished
dude.
having a whole lot of more conversation, because this is something that's going on right now in the world, and you have it in your book, The Rise of Technology Socialism.
There it is.
And it, listen, I have that book, but I'm going to order another book, and I would like for you to sign my book
I would
because
love to sign it for you, man.
yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to order another book, and definitely we have to get it signed. And I have to have you come back on so we can talk a little bit more about what's in that book, and maybe we can go chapter to chapter.
I'd love
Because
that.
when I tell you, yeah, because when I tell you that book is very interesting, and how you break it down chapter by chapter really tells me that, guess what? All the movies that I was watching 10 years ago,
I
15
know.
years ago, uh, people,
Yes,
the
some of
movie was
this.
actually right. Some of the
Yeah,
stuff was
some of this stuff's gonna happen, man. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So definitely, man. So I
Thank you
definitely
very much.
appreciate you. Thank you. So can you tell everybody where to find you at on any IGs or websites?
Sure, absolutely. So, if you're on Instagram, Brett_K is my Insta. But you can also check me out on brettking.com, or go to riseoftechnosocialism.com, or at Brett King on Twitter, Brett King author on Facebook. You should be able to find me all those different locations. But thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, no problem, no problem. Don't forget your show, because I mean, even though I have a show, you can promote your show too. So
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So I got Breaking Banks. You can check out Breaking Banks as my podcast. We've been running for 8 years now. So we really talk about disruption to the banking sector. That's another thing.
Mhm.
Banks have got to go, man.
Woo, woo. That's what I said. Hold up, before you go, let's get into a little bit of banking. See, even though you was about to go,
I threw it out there.
yes, you did, yes, you did. So let's talk a little bit about banking just for a second,
Sure.
because now with the crypto is happening now, and it's like a full fledged crypto thing. What is really going to happen to the dollar?
Well, this is very interesting, because a part of it's the change in the economy is that, if you think about money, money was created to create common methods of value exchange. There was
Mhm.
bartering and other things like that, but prior to that, people just shared their resources amongst, their crowd and their tribe and so forth. But, as humans expanded, we needed common forms of value exchange. So that's where money comes in. And so if you're in, the US, or if you're in the UK, then you needed something that everyone would accept. And so having a geographically based currency made sense in those days. But of
Mhm.
course, today, we have the internet, and we can buy stuff off Alibaba in China and have it sent from
Right,
China, right? So
right.
it's a global economy. And so so we're trying to find now digital global currencies that will work better for the 21st century. And that's what cryptocurrency and the Bitcoin experiment in particular was really about. But we also now have these central banks, like China's a good example, that are creating their own digital currencies. They call them central bank digital currencies. So we nickname it the yuan, or the, because that's the name they give to a dollar in China, or a Chinese currency.
Mhm.
And so, you have now cryptocurrencies, you have NFTs, which is a form of a
Mhm.
crypto asset.
Mhm.
You have central banks trying to come up with their own digital currencies. So digital currencies are definitely going to be the future. Now, if you look at crypto, I mean, the first Bitcoin was mined in 2008. And
Yep.
today, the entire cryptocurrency industry is worth $3 trillion. Right.
Wow.
So the growth just since 2008 is incredible. And so if you map that out over the next decade or so, it's logical that cryptocurrencies are going to expand in value, and we're going to see more crypto assets and things like that, because the world is trying to figure out, how do we digitize commerce? How do we digitize trade? How do we digitize assets? That's
Mhm.
really what's happening because of the increase in technology. Where it gets really funky is, these robots that are going to be flying around in the future delivering
Yeah.
pizzas and stuff like
Yeah.
that. They, for example, might have their own currencies that work just for those robotic platforms and things like that,
Wow.
based on the time that they fly or the weight of
Right.
the package they deliver and things like that. So, we are really going to see a move away from like a US dollar as the world's reserve currency. We're going to see a lot more fragmentation. But
Mhm.
in the meantime, China, because of their role in global trade and the fact that by the end of this decade, they'll be the largest economy in the world, the Chinese currency has a good chance of surpassing the US currency over the next 20 years, but through their digital currency.
Right.
So the US really should be very aggressively adopting crypto if they want to compete with China. That's basically the real answer.
Wow. Because I know I was planning a trip to go to Amsterdam, and a couple of places in Amsterdam.
They grow some good vegetables in Amsterdam
yes,
too, man.
they do. Yes, they do. And they a couple of spots that I was going to go to only accept crypto.
Yep. So I think this is part of the world that we're moving into. You're also going to see more people sort of work collectively together using different cryptocurrencies because they have different ethical frameworks. So, for example, people may insist on only selling or buying goods and services in the future that's on a green crypto coin. Right? That's saying that, no, we know that this has been produced sustainably, it's been produced renewable energy, and we're putting back carbon credits into the system or something like that. And so we insist on you using, so people are going to start making decisions of which currencies they use based on their belief set and their ideologies as well, to some extent. It's a very dynamic, moving space. It's going to be, we're only just at the start. That's really what I want to tell you.
Hey, you're right about that. You're right about that. Well, thank you again. You willed me in.
Good to meet you.
Soon as you talk about banking, you willed me in, but you have to come back on for we can actually get into that. So
I'd love that.
Yes. So thank you again, Mr. King.
Have a great weekend, man.
All right, man. I appreciate you. Make sure you tell everybody once again before you leave, tell everybody your IG and your website and the show.
Yeah, Brett_K, BrettKing.com. Rise of Techno-Socialism is the new book. You can get it on Amazon or check me out on Breaking Banks on our podcast there. And next year I'm launching a new podcast called The Futurist. So stay tuned for that one.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm going to be reaching back out to you because I'm going to buy my book and get it signed from you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
it. For sure.
All right, man. Thank you again.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, man. Good show, everybody, man. Appreciate Mr. Brent King joining us here on the show. Make sure y'all get his book, The Rise of Techno-Socialism. Very good book. I'm telling y'all, very, very good book. When I tell y'all he breaks everything down, he breaks it down to the T, y'all. He breaks it down to the T. So I definitely appreciate him so much for joining your boy here on the show. I appreciate everything that he have done. Make sure y'all go ahead and check out the book again, Rise of Techno-Socialism. I'm telling you, y'all, it's a good book. I'm telling y'all can find it on Amazon. I'm telling you, it's a very good book. So once again, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all, and make sure y'all tune in to your boy OT. You can actually catch all of the replays on YouTube, OT Radio Show 1. And thank you again, y'all. See y'all I have another interview at 5:15. So see y'all at about 5:15 p.m. Peace.
Thank you very much, man.
Oh, man, no problem. Thank you, man. I appreciate you, man.